All right. Well, welcome back to the Rice Report, everybody. Eric Rice, your host here. As you know, we talk about things that other people don't right now. And one of the things that many people are talking about is this massive object hurling towards Earth from outer space. And today we are joined by Avi Loeb, who is the director of the Institute of Theory and Computation at Harvard University, one of those who interpreted the signals and who is getting information out to the world about what is happening. So thank you for joining us today, Avi. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, your background kind of speaks for itself. You've done a ton of things, not just in the academic world, research, computation, theory. Very interesting background. I'll let you walk through that if you like.
Yeah, but I should caution the listeners that the background is not important when you deal with a blind date of
Oh,
interstellar
correct, correct.
proportions. I mean, it's just like meeting a lot of people, but then on a blind date, you never know whether you will have a serial killer showing up. At any event, I was chair of the astronomy department at Harvard for almost a decade, 9 years between 2011 and 2020. I'm the founding director of the Black Hole Initiative at Harvard and currently the director of the Institute for Theory and Computation. And I chair the board on physics and astronomy of the National Academies, and also was a member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology Policy at the White House. So in a way, I'm part of the establishment, the leadership of science, but I never gave up on my sense of curiosity that brought me to physics. And I was reminded of that just a week ago. I was invited to give a talk at the Niels Bohr Institute. As you may know, Niels Bohr was among the pioneers of quantum mechanics a century ago. And 95 years ago, in 1930, there was a famous conference that he organized where he was seated in the front row alongside Werner Heisenberg and Wolfgang Pauli and Lev Landau, and there is a famous photograph of them sitting in that auditorium. And when I arrived at the Niels Bohr Institute, I realized that the conference is taking place in the same auditorium, Auditorium A. And I went to sit in the front row, and I sat in the middle, and I was told that that was the seat of Wolfgang Pauli. And all I could think at that point was how uncomfortable is this wooden bench that I'm sitting on, because the quality of life for those luminaries was much worse than any of us encounter these days. And but I would trade quickly, happily, being 95 years ago in the same auditorium, because the room was full of the spirit of innovation, deviation from traditional thinking, and those kind of traits were not ridiculed on social media the way they are now by zealots who are advocating that we should think that everything in the sky must be rocks. And so in a way, I really enjoyed being there, giving a talk. I was planning to speak on black holes only, but then the audience wanted me to speak also about this new interstellar object that we'll speak about, called the Three-Eye Atlas, which was discovered just a couple of months ago. And all the questions from the audience were about this object and whether it's technological and what the anomalies of this object mean. And I'll be glad to discuss those issues. But what I would like to emphasize is that, science is fun if you allow yourself to explore ideas outside of the beaten path. And that's, really the spirit of a kid trying to learn about the world. So you ask yourself, why isn't that practiced more often? And the answer is because these kids that entered science out of a sense of curiosity become adults. And they rub against each other, try to impress each other, and they lose their shine. They lose the spirit of curiosity. It's sort of like seashells on the beach that lose their color after they rub against each other for a while. And I didn't lose that. I don't have any footprint on social media, and I don't pretend to know more than I actually know. So that's why, I had more than 1 million readers of my essays on medium.com over the past couple of months regarding Three-Eye Atlas. And the public resonates with that. And, it's really opposite to what the mainstream practice in science right now, which is to tell the public the truth and not to be attentive to the questions from the public, and there is a sense of superiority when the intellectuals in academia are speaking to the public, and
Sure.
I don't like that, because science is work in progress, and I don't regard myself as more privileged than anyone else, except that I have a day job that allows me to pursue my curiosity.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. So, like, I've got some background in quantum myself, and curiosity is. I always tell people, imagination is life and death.
Exactly. And you know why? Because nature is more imaginative than we are.
Oh, way
So
more.
quantum mechanics is an excellent example where nobody actually imagined that the physical reality behaves in that way, and we still don't fully understand it. We don't have a good interpretation of what quantum mechanics means.
Yeah.
And it's just to show you that our experience, day-to-day experience, and also the script you find in Hollywood for science fiction movies, I'm willing to bet that they are far less imaginative than any artifact that we will find from another civilization near Earth.
Absolutely. Let's hop into 3i Atlas. So it was discovered through a telescope in Chile.
Right.
And that data got to you, and you've been the one kind of the sounding board, verifying, non-verifying, whatever it is. What is this thing hurling towards Earth? Is it mechanical? Is it an asteroid? Is it real? Like, these are
Right.
questions people are
No,
going to have to ask.
it's definitely real. I should say that there were some conspiracy theories that were arguing that I bring up this object just to distract the public from the files of Jeffrey Epstein. And I try to explain that this object exists in the sky. You can buy a 0.5-meter telescope on Amazon and look at the sky. And to imagine that I can arrange an object that is at a distance of 4.5 times the Earth-Sun separation would make me more powerful than the Pope. And because this object is being observed also by space telescopes like the
It
Webb
is suspicious
telescope.
timing, though, Avi. You've got to give it that. It's very suspicious timing.
Well, okay, so here is what happened. On July 1st, the object was found by a relatively small telescope called Atlas in Chile, 0.5-meter in size. And that meant the object was relatively bright. And I immediately, I woke up early that night because I was interviewed on Coast to Coast, and I was up at 2 a.m. And then one of the listeners emailed me during the interview about it, and I immediately concluded this object must be huge in size, because if it's a solid body reflecting sunlight at its distance, it needs to be 20 kilometers in diameter. And that's as big as Manhattan Island, and it's a million times more massive than the previous two interstellar objects. An interstellar object is an object not bound by gravity to the sun. And we can tell that because it moves too fast. The sun cannot bind it. It moves faster than the planets, for example. So it was clear that this is an anomaly. To me, how can you find a rock that is a million times more massive than previous objects, without seeing a million of those objects before you see this one? And I also calculated a few days later, it was the 4th of July, and my wife wanted to go for a vacation. And I couldn't resist the temptation of writing a paper about it, basically saying that there is not enough rocky material in interstellar space to deliver a rock that big to the vicinity of Earth every decade.
How can we determine that, though? How
Because
do you determine that there isn't
because
enough
we know how much rocky material there is around the sun. Okay, right now we have an estimate, and it's of the order of 10 times the mass of the Earth or so. That's roughly what we have. And even if you assume that 1,000 times more rocky material was ejected per star than you currently find in the solar system or around other stars, even if you assume 1,000, you still run short in accommodating a 20-kilometer sized object arriving at random. These rocks are moving random trajectories. So, and you really need to package all of the rocky material into 20-kilometer rocks in order to even achieve that. But you need at least 10 to 100 times more than 1,000 times. So it's just untenable if it's that big. And of course, one solution that I suggested in the paper that I wrote on July 4th was Well, maybe it's a small object, less than a kilometer, and we just see the reflection of sunlight from a dust cloud, a very compact dust cloud around it. And the problem was that in the days that we kept observing it, the Hubble Space Telescope, for example, gave the best image. There wasn't any trail of dust that you expect. If there is a dust cloud, the solar radiation pressure would push the dust particles very effectively, and they would trail behind the object in a beautiful cometary tail. You see that around comets. And there was no such trail around the object, at least during the month of July. And so therefore I said, well, in that case, maybe the object is so big, but how can we then accommodate such a big object? Well, if it has nothing to do with the reservoir of rocky material in interstellar space, maybe it's technological. It's targeting the inner solar system. It didn't come on a random orbit. And then I looked at the trajectory, and I realized that actually this trajectory is aligned with the plane of the planets around the sun to within 5 degrees. And the chance of that happening at random is 1 in 500. We haven't seen a few hundred objects before we saw this one. It's the third object that we spotted with telescopes from interstellar space. So that sounds like an anomaly at the level of less than 1%. And moreover, by now we measured that there is a plume of gas. The Webb telescope observed it, that there is a plume of gas around it, and it's mostly carbon dioxide. 95% of the mass around it is carbon dioxide and not water, the way you expect from a water-rich typical comet that we can imagine, that we find in the solar system. So that's unusual. And then just last week, there were observations of the composition of the plume of gas around it. And they found, with a very large telescope in Chile, they found nickel without iron. And usually nickel and iron appear together because they're produced in stellar explosions together. And the only place where you don't find them together is when you make nickel alloys in industrial production of nickel, for example, for a spacecraft. And that's unprecedented in all the comets that we looked at before. We had both nickel and iron with comparable amounts. And
how do you guys determine that there's nickel, iron, and carbon dioxide, thousands of miles away like that?
That's straightforward, because these are atoms or molecules that have based on quantum mechanics, they have transitions between energy levels. So they either absorb or emit radiation. So they can absorb sunlight, and you see them in absorption, or they emit spectral lines that are associated with transitions between energy levels. And those are unique. They are the fingerprints of different atoms or molecules. And that's how you tell that these things exist. We do it in the laboratory on Earth when we want to figure out the composition of a gas. We look at the spectroscopy of the gas. In a spectrograph, you can see those spectral lines. And we are pretty much, we have
but how do we replicate like the functionality of a mass spectrometer or something a million miles away? Like, how do you replicate that? This is a valid question, I think, for everyone.
Yeah, the distance is not an issue if the object is bright enough, because if you detect enough photons, particles of light, then you take a spectrum of the object. And of course, if it's not bright enough, then you can't, it's too faint for you to detect. But in this case, it's a very bright object, and it will get brighter as it comes closer to the sun. And we have enough photons to tell that there are spectral lines at wavelengths of radiation that are characteristic of these molecules and atoms. So we can tell that there is neutral nickel atoms, and not only that, but we can infer how much mass loss in those atoms you have every second. And in the case of nickel, it's we are talking about 6 grams, but in the case of CO2, it's about 129 kilograms per second. That's huge, but it's not so big if you imagine a 20-kilometer sized object, because you just need to ablate a layer of about less than a millimeter in order to sustain this plume of gas that we see for a period of a year. So it's really the skin of the object that gets evaporated, and that's what we see in the plume of gas it's not a very active comet. It's a relatively weak ablation of the surface. And the question is whether it's a natural object or an artificial. And of course, as it comes closer to the sun, we should be able to tell better. Just to give you an example, it will also unusually come close to Mars, then Venus, and eventually Jupiter. So on October 3rd, it will come within 29 million kilometers of Mars. And there is a camera called HiRISE on board the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter that will provide us with an image of this object, 3I Atlas, with a pixel resolution of 30 kilometers when it comes close to Mars. And I very much look forward to seeing that image, because it would tell us how, or constrain how big is the nucleus of this object. And if the object, for example, happens to be technological and it released some kind of a mini probe that will visit Mars, then the same camera could see it. We cannot see it from the distance of the Earth, but the camera near Mars can do it. I should say that on October 29th, this object will come closest to the sun. And unfortunately, the Earth would be on the opposite side of the sun, so we won't be able to observe it. But that's the best time for a spacecraft, for example, to do a maneuver. And if it doesn't come out the way it came in, I think it's possible the stock market may crash, because it will indicate there is visitation by some alien technology. And then if nothing really happens and it continues along its expected path, on March 16th, 2026, it will pass close to Jupiter. And there is a spacecraft there called Juno that I wrote a paper about, suggesting to use it and use as much fuel as it still has to approach.
So hold on a second. So are we determining at the moment that this is a comet or that this is a spaceship?
We don't know. So I decided
because Avi, I gotta say, for the conspiracy theorists that you just bashed, you just came out like a conspiracy theorist right there.
No, I'm talking about data. I'm not, you see, the best way to distinguish.
Well, you just said it would run out of fuel, right?
Well, let me finish my sentence,
sure,
if you allow me. I mean, otherwise you keep asking questions and I don't have time to respond. So the best way to distinguish what you call the conspiracy theorist from a scientist is that if you give both of them a lot of data, the conspiracy theorist will be unhappy, because it may actually violate the theory that the conspiracy theorist has. And a genuine scientist would be happy with as much data as you give, because that allows to decide what is the correct interpretation of the data. And so as a scientist, I'm looking forward to getting as much data as possible. I don't pretend that I know the answer in advance. And a month ago, I defined a scale that is now called the Loeb Scale, where 0 is a natural object, something that looks like a comet, definitely, and 10 is a technological object. And as of July and the first, what we have so far of the data we got also in August, I would give it a 4 between 0 and 10. But if the data shows beyond any doubt that it looks like a comet, then I'll give it. I'll revise I will update my assessment to 0.
That's interesting. So 0 is natural, 10 would be man-made, or
well, not man, some other civilization, because it's moving at 60 kilometers per second, twice as fast as any rocket that we launched in the past, and that's the speed by which it entered the solar system. So it's definitely not human-made if it's technological, but it would be an indication that we are not alone, of course, if it happens to be. And that will be the biggest discovery ever made in science. So there is this wager that Pascal made about God. Pascal was a French mathematician, and he said, we should consider the notion of God, because the implications would be huge if God exists. And I say the same about the technological object.
Well, I believe God exists. I'm going to be questionable about these objects, but that's what data is for. Data is all about.
So what is your argument that God exists?
Where did everything come from, Avi?
Oh, from the Big Bang. And I don't know what happened before the Big Bang. That's to be found by science. But why do you think there was a creator? Why not a natural process that led to what we have?
Wouldn't there be a creator to create a natural process? Where would nature come from?
No,
You're
well,
describing a Big Bang, but Big Bang would be also the colliding of the original God particle. Why did they call it the God particle?
well, when I go to the beach, I find all kinds of objects there, but I don't imagine for a minute that there was an artist that made them. Okay, so you are adding another layer to reality where you say, I see beautiful things around me, therefore there must have been a creator. And I say, no, they could have just happened. What's the,
Certainly, that's the argument, right? That's the argument of a believer and an atheist, and it's not non-scientific. But I want to stay on track to the UFO
no,
or
but
to the UAP, whatever they call them these days.
actually, I can unify the 2 points of view, because if we understood how quantum mechanics and gravity can be put together, then we would have a better sense of what happened before the Big Bang. And having a better sense of that would allow us to have a recipe for creating the universe, because you can basically put these ingredients that ended up making the Big Bang in the universe. You can put these ingredients just like a recipe for a cake. You put them together, you add enough heat at the right time, and you end up with a universe in the laboratory. And so my point is that a sufficiently intelligent scientist could create a universe in the laboratory. And here is your God.
I mean, that's the definition, right? Like, this is an age-old battle that began back when you can go back about 450 years, where
No, they didn't know
science
about
replaces God.
They did not know about quantum mechanics and general relativity. What I said has to do with quantum mechanics and general relativity. If we had a prescription for how to unify them, we could figure out what ingredients and what process led to our universe.
And that would allow man to become God, right? To create a universe in a lab.
Well, you need also an oven. So we will have the recipe. If you have a recipe for a cake, it doesn't mean that you can make the cake. You need an oven and you need the ingredients. But at the very least, we can imagine an entity that has those ingredients, like a very high energy accelerator that is creating the conditions necessary for the Big Bang. And if we ever achieve that technology, then we could create a baby universe in the laboratory, just like you create a baby, in the womb of a person, a human.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there's dangers to science, right? Like, I'm fascinated by science. I literally am sitting, the closet right in the wall adjacent to me is filled with science projects for me and my kids. So I love the stuff. I love the conversations. I just don't know that I'll ever be convinced that there isn't a God, because I've experienced him in my life. But I want to know this object that's hurling at 60 kilometers a second, which is intense speed. I mean, that is very intense speed. Is this
Right.
something for Earth to be concerned about? Is this?
No,
We don't know what it is. It sounds like the direction you described, it's flowing away from us, right? So it went by Venus. It's going to
oh,
be
no, no,
around
no,
Mars.
it's not. It's still approaching. It's still approaching. This speed is twice as large as the speed of the Earth around the sun. So it's not huge. And there is a reason for that. If it were moving, so this speed is about 1 part in 500 or so. Actually, 1 part in 5,000 of the speed of light. Okay, so it's a very small speed relative to the speed of light, smaller by a factor of 5,000. And so in principle, there is a lot of room for improvement. You can imagine spacecraft that are traveling much faster. The issue is that the astronomers would not detect them. If there is an object moving at a fraction of the speed of light, it would appear as a streak, it will be smeared into a line in the image of a telescope that is doing the exposure for 30 seconds or 60 seconds, and it would be too faint. This line would be too faint to be detectable. Astronomers will dismiss it, would assume it's an artifact, even if they see it. So we are tuning our detection method to objects that are moving at speeds comparable to those of the planets, and that's why we can only find those. And this one is moving fast, 60 kilometers per second, but not much faster than the Earth moves around the sun or other planets in our vicinity. So that was the speed of the object when it was far from the solar system, but it will get accelerated as it approaches the sun, and it will actually move on a retrograde trajectory opposite to the motion of the planets around the sun. And one wonders if that's for a purpose, because then if it releases mini probes, they would actually approach the planets rather than chase the planets along their path. So we will know, most likely it's just a rock. I asked myself if we should message it, and I said, let's wait until we figure it out. The other question is whether I will be happier if it happens to be a rock, because then humanity will not be threatened. There will be no issue. And I realized that actually, on the one hand, that would make me happy, but on the other hand, we desperately need a wake-up call, because our priorities right now, if you check the morning news, it's all about conflicts. We put $2.4
Sure.
trillion to military budgets and so forth. And just seeing some threat from the sky, I think, will bring us perhaps together, since we will realize that we are all in the same boat.
Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be a threat from the sky, right? We could need to see
Right.
inspiration from the sky, right? I
Yes,
mean,
an opportunity. So that depends on whether you are an optimist or a pessimist. So when you go on a blind date, do you imagine your date partner to be a serial killer or a very friendly person? And I'm usually an optimist, because life is very often a self-fulfilling prophecy, and if you
Sure.
tell yourself something is dangerous, then you create it by your own action. And
Sure.
we know about many wars, including the Vietnam War, that were triggered by misinterpretation of hostilities.
Oh, sure. I mean, most wars are
Yeah.
attributed to that in human history. It's just it's a powder keg. We're always waiting for war, right? That's kind of like a certain faction of humanity is.
Well,
But
I
you're
would argue it's more common among men, and that's unfortunate.
of course, yeah. But your curiosity is going crazy right now. This is something you've been working for your whole life. You've written a book, I think, called Interstellar. You've written 9 books. So in those books, you're authoring extraterrestrial, interstellar. You talked about probes being dropped off, although it's probably just a rock, is what you said. So there's a 40% chance that it's not a rock, right? That's kind of where we're in the 4 out of 10 scale. But like, tell us, like, let your imagination go. Like, what if this is what your childhood curiosity thinks it is? What is it?
Yeah, so I think all bets are off when you date someone from another star, because our imagination is limited to what we encountered on Earth, and
Sure.
it would be a mistake to assume that we can guess. And by the way, we after this wake-up call, after the first encounter with an artifact that is extraterrestrial, I think then the political system and the financial system will respond, and we will perhaps establish an organization, international organization, that decides how to respond to a visitor in your backyard. It's very different from getting a message from thousands of light years away, where there is no threat or danger. And in this case, if you have a visitor, that visitor can come up through your front door, and you have to decide what to do about it. And also you need some alert system in the solar system, perhaps an array of interceptors that would alert us on Earth if there is anything else coming. And so it will change our perspective. And most importantly, it will bring a sense of modesty, that in the past was provided by religions, and now people who are secular, they feel maybe we are the most powerful species that existed in the universe since the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. There is a substantial fraction of the scientific community that believes that. And I say that, given that there are 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and a substantial fraction of them has a planet like the Earth, roughly the same separation, that we're probably in the middle of the class of intelligent civilizations. There were many like us billions of years ago, and we should seek them, because where is everybody, is the most romantic question in science, and we should find a partner out there, and it will change everything about our, existential status and perception. And I had a group of religious scholars from Christianity Today visit me at Harvard, and they asked me what will happen if to our religious belief if we find extraterrestrials. And I said, I have 2 daughters, and when the second one was born, it didn't take away the love that I have to the first one. So imagining that God is just a parent that can attend to one child is very limiting, and we could have siblings out there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is, I'm going to throw it out there, right? So, what you just described is if we had some sort of sky encounter that may be threatening to humanity, it would humble humanity.
It will humble, exactly.
More
That's
importantly,
that's
I
the
think,
greatest benefit, I think.
but humbling is a good word. The other kind of thing that I hear from that is it may scare humanity into creating a one world government
Yes,
to
cooperation.
deal.
Yes, exactly.
You
And
do you do
it's
understand how terrifying that is, right? A unified
well,
global governance.
the one thing that surprised me is that over the past 2 months, I don't have any footprint on social media, and on X, there was a tweet every few seconds about what I'm saying, and the way I understand it is because people, are really triggered if something scary is happening. So the possibility of a threat is really far more worthy of discussion among people who go to social media than just the scientific discovery of another intelligence out there. So I completely agree with you that the risk or the danger it will attract a huge amount of attention. It already does.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the conspiracy theories out there is that we would use some sort of a false alien invasion to create a one world government. I mean, this has been around for like 30 years right now. So
Why is that? Why is that the negative? I would think that if we cooperated on Earth, everyone would live in prosperity. That there would be no wars. That's better.
that's your opinion. There's certainly people who believe in nationalism, that they just want to live in their own country, live in their own village, and let their lives be ruled by someone who lives by them, as opposed to somebody on the
Yeah,
other side of the world.
I'm sure if we were still, if we were 100,000 years ago in the jungle, there would be some advocates of staying on the trees. I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, we all have different opinions. That's the beautiful part of humanity is that we don't have a group think yet. That we don't have to think the same way. And some people do just want to stay on the trees and live in the jungle and be left alone, not bothered
Well,
by it.
the issue is that if you are separating humanity into groups, what happens, as we see from the news, is that they engage in conflicts and they kill each other, and the quality of life is degraded for everyone. It's sort of like mud wrestling. You might say it's a lot of fun to mud wrestle, but then everyone gets dirty.
No, I mean, you can see the points of view. I disagree with that point of view. I think that human beings have much more important things in life than bowing down to a global government issued by a foreign nation in some other land that doesn't understand where I live. So you can understand both sides. I understand both sides of thinking.
Yeah, but
Certainly, war and violence is a bad thing.
ultimately, we'll have to leave Earth because Earth will be engulfed by the sun. You realize that in a bit, in
Just
seven.
like the coastlines were gone. Weren't the coastlines supposed to be gone like 20 years ago? We're not supposed to have coastlines. It's supposed to be like
Oh, no,
30
no,
miles inland
no,
now.
no. This has nothing to do with Earth. This has to do with the sun, which is a star, and the star is basically a nuclear reactor that burns fuel, and eventually the fuel is consumed. There is no way out of that. The sun will disappear. Just
Hmm.
I once went to a dentist, and the receptionist said, I thought that the sun will exist forever. It's against my religion that the sun will disappear. I said, sorry to tell you the news, but we see a lot of stars disappearing from the sky, that were
Sure.
just like the sun and or more massive, and they disappear. And so the point is the sun will not last forever. Okay, so this argument that there is nothing new under the sun, that's not true, because the sun will not be there. And when the sun will evolve, it will initially expand and engulf the Earth. So the Earth will be drawn into the core of the sun, where it will be destroyed altogether. Nothing will be left. So eventually, we will definitely need to escape from the Earth in order to survive. And other civilizations, I mean, this you might think is hypothetical. Who cares? 7.6 billion years from now. But for other civilizations that predated us, this already happened. Okay, and they had to leave their planet, and they had to embark on a spacecraft, and you can think of it as Noah's
How do we know
Ark.
that? How do
Well,
we?
because we see those stars exploding or disappearing.
No, but
We
how do
see.
we know that they left their
Oh,
planet on a
if
spacecraft?
if they were still arguing in favor of nationalism to stay on their planet, they may not have survived. Yes, definitely. If they
No,
adapt
no, no,
your
no,
view
no.
of,
That's not the question, Avi. The question is, how do you know that other planets exited their planet on a spacecraft to survive?
we don't know. I'm saying that's the
Ah,
only way for them to have survived, and that's why it doesn't make sense to get attached to a territory on a rock that you happen to be born on, because this rock would not last forever. That's what I'm telling you.
Well, I'm going to agree to disagree. I appreciate your point of view on that. I think that the if the Earth explodes and engulfs the Earth at one point in
The
time, that's
sun, the
probably
sun.
the
Yeah.
sun. Yeah, excuse me. The sun explodes, impacts the Earth, we all die. I mean, maybe that's part of God's plan for us. Maybe our expiration date has come there. But I think it's fascinating. It's a fascinating theory to think about. How would we escape Earth? Didn't
Oh,
NASA said they lost the technology to go to the moon? So how do we get off of this rock?
you see, we invest $2.4 trillion in military budgets
Mm.
worldwide every year. And if we were to just take a fraction of that and put it in into space exploration, I believe we can come up with a platform in space that can accommodate people much better than Mars. You know, Mars is a desert. It doesn't have an atmosphere. The temperature changes by hundreds of degrees between day and night. And if you go there to the surface, your body would be bombarded with energetic particles, cosmic rays that would destroy any tissue in your body within a few years. You wouldn't survive. So it's much better to build a space platform that humans can live on. And it's a question of money and resources and dedication. So I think if instead of killing each other, we would all come together to invest $1 trillion a year, let's say, in space exploration, we could accomplish that feat by the end of this century. It's just a question of priorities.
So if we just stop fighting each other, acknowledge that the sun is going to explode and the earth is going to be engulfed, and just spend $1 trillion of taxpayer money to create a space platform for us to float around like the Jetsons throughout the universe, that's the ideal
I
scenario.
would be the first to go on that platform. But I should tell you that this is obviously not going to happen unless there is a wake-up call. And if we see another species out there that did it already, it's just like meeting a smarter student in your class. You get inspired to imitate that student. That just like Oscar Wilde said, the imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Yeah.
So if we see someone more accomplished than we are, and we are like kids in a kindergarten, throwing sand on each other in the sandbox, and suddenly someone else comes, and that someone comes in a fancy car next to us, and you just seeing that would change our perspective. Instead of throwing sand on each other, we might say to each other, why don't we have such a car ourselves?
Yeah, this is one of the more interesting conversations I've had in a long time, because it's scientific and philosophical at the same time, which is great because you're using your imagination.
Yeah, that's
So
who I am. I'm sorry, I will not change my colors.
no, it's Avi. I don't expect anyone to change their colors. I think that's the main problem with the world today, is that everyone wants everyone else to be like them, and that would
Yes,
be really boring if everyone
it
was
could
just
be.
like you.
Exactly.
So I think it's fascinating that I think the end result is that life is, from this conversation, is that life is scary. The earth is going to end. We need to spend $1 trillion of taxpayer money to create platforms, but we won't do this unless we encounter a superior
Exactly.
species who's created a spacecraft from a
Exactly.
foreign land somewhere in the universe to come to Earth and say, guys, the same thing's going to happen to you. You just need to bow down to a one world government, give us all your tax money, and we'll explore space for you. Is that kind of a good synopsis?
Exactly. No, you got it right. Yes. And
Okay.
I should say that I'm really grateful that not everyone thinks like me, because otherwise I wouldn't have a job. One of the surprises in my life was what I think about, I regard as common sense. Like, it sounds to me completely reasonable, but then I realize other people do not. And my conclusion is that common sense is not common in academia.
Uh, I don't think anyone will argue with that statement right there, Avi. That's probably the most like straightforward, honest piece of advice you can give to the world right there. Common sense is not common in academia today.
By the
Absolutely.
way, and the reason I seek a higher intelligence in interstellar space is because I don't find it around me in academia. So it's like being in a party, and you see all the attendees of the party, the party goers, behaving in ways that you don't fully understand, and then the only thing you can do is look through the window and hope for a newcomer that will improve the situation.
Yeah, I mean, you could try giving prayer a shot too, Avi. That might help you as well, man. Either way, you'll be there. This is fascinating. So where did this, as a kid, you obviously started this, but where, I mean, I'm just going through the process. It's got to be scary. We've got to have a one world government to deal with a higher being that comes from a different planet in a universe and space. And when that happens, we won't get there. We won't survive unless we just come up with $1 trillion a year for the next, you said by the end of the century. So for the next 75 years. So 75 trillion, we can figure out how to save ourselves from an impending doom 7.6 million years away. Right? That's
7.6 billion years away.
seven,
No,
okay,
but also,
right around the corner.
I mean, no, I mean, there are other existential risks, I mean, there is artificial intelligence potentially becoming.
Shouldn't that help us get to space?
It could help us because, many of the materials can be designed by AI, and the data that we collect can be analyzed by AI. AI could be a great benefit to science. That's the way I see it. It's an opportunity for us to do better than the human brain can do. So I very much look forward to that. But it's also a risk because.
But didn't the human brain create the artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that could happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we obviously have an exciting time ahead of us. I really hope for a wake-up call because it will change our priorities to do better. And
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think humanity needs a wake-up call. I don't know if we need a wake-up call in the form of a UFO with satellites dropping us off before the Earth explodes, but humanity absolutely needs a wake-up call to bring love and peace back into this world, because
I completely agree. I completely agree.
That's where we change the trajectory of all humanity.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I was born on a farm, and I from early on I was very much connected to nature, and I jog every morning at sunrise, and I really love nature, and I see the source of all the problems we have in human nature. That and if we could improve that, then our life would be so much better.
Where was home? Where's the farm?
It's about 20 kilometers away from Tel Aviv in Israel. That's where I grew up, and I ended up in doing science by circumstances because I had to serve, and I was very much interested in philosophy to start with, and that's what you noticed already. And I'm very different from my colleagues in science simply because it was an arranged marriage for me.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, I'm going to say this is going to be one of the more interesting episodes I put out there. Is that we've got spacecraft, potentially a 40% chance of a spacecraft right now, and that is the, what is it? It's named after you. What is it? The Loeb Scale.
Yes.
The Loeb Scale. So we got the guy who invented the scale on whether or not an object is a rock or a constructed, device or transporting vehicle or something not a rock in the universe. So that's very interesting. Avi, this is great. Like, I know you're not on social media, but you said you had something on Medium. Where can people follow you on Medium?
So if you just search for Avi Loeb, AVI LOEB at medium.com, you can get to my essays, and you can subscribe for free. I don't charge anything. Awesome. And you will get the email notifications whenever I post a new essay. In fact, I'm going to post one today.
What's it about? Give us a preview.
There is an architect who has a PhD that wrote a new book in Spain about extraterrestrial architecture, and he asked me a set of questions that he plans to post on Instagram tomorrow, and I answered these questions about extraterrestrial architecture and finding constructions of other species out there. And what can we learn from that? What can we imagine it to be? And what will it mean for us? And so I talk about all of that, and you can find it on my medium.com essays.
I can't end now. So have we found alien architecture verifiably on Earth?
No.
No, not yet.
No, not yet. I went to the Pacific Ocean to search for materials from an interstellar meteor, and there will be a Netflix documentary about it coming out in 2026, about half a year from now. And I was just searching for that. If I were to find the core of this interstellar meteor and it happened to be technological, we would have a piece of debris from some architecture, from something like a Voyager kind of.
Yeah. One question from just the kid at heart here, right? So we seem to know so much about space, but we don't know much about the ocean. Why is that?
Well, because it was not explored. 72% of the Earth's surface is ocean, and we explored only a small part of it. And
but why not spend $1 trillion a year and figuring out what's below the surface as opposed to above our head?
Excellent question. It's a question of priorities, you see. So The oceans does serve military purposes, but it's primarily on top of it and not so. I mean, there are submarines, but the bottom of the ocean was not mapped, as you indicate, and most of it. And yeah, there might be a lot of secrets down there. For example, the Sahara Desert used to be underwater, and
Yes,
it's not.
correct.
And so the ocean was not in the same place, and there might be some
And a lot of our UFO sightings,
archaeological things now under the ocean that we have never explored.
Right. And a lot of the UAP, UFO, documented cases of sightings are either entering or leaving the ocean.
True.
I think that would probably be a good place to start because we have easier access with less friction on travel to get there. There's no Van Allen belt in the water. There's just water pressure, which we can build and grow
Definitely
into.
worth exploring. And I'm leading the Galileo project that is exploring the sky. We have 3 observatories, one in Massachusetts, another one in Pennsylvania, and the third one in Nevada. And we're getting data on a few million objects every year and hope to figure out if any of them is an outlier that is not human made. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. This is fascinating. Yeah. So this is going to be tremendous. I can't wait to see the comments on this. Right. So this is going to be very interesting. We have a Harvard scientist urging a one world government and trillions of dollars in space financing to create a platform to escape Earth, and that science disproves the evidence of God. This is going to be you're a brave guy, man. Avi, I give you that. This is
well, the fact that I'm alive means that I managed to survive.
That's right.
All the criticism. So yeah, I'm looking forward to any constructive criticism that anyone has. So.
Absolutely. Avi, this is amazing. I'm going to check out your Medium. I'm always fascinated by this. Here's the one thing I will tell people. I have no idea what reality is. I don't think any human being truly understands reality at all, especially in 2025. I think that we are watching old history be broken, and we can see the narrative and lies there. I think we're starting to see new history develop that's being created, some on truth, some on lies. We have no idea. Science is a great mediator between what reality is, could be, or should be. And philosophy is the obvious direction towards should be. So one thing
I should mention one caveat: as long as the gatekeepers are not blocking new knowledge, and they exist also in academia. So we just need to make.
Well, they're the primary gatekeepers.
Yeah, we need to make innovation more acceptable within academia, because otherwise we will not learn anything new.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And our we've just piled on more and more gatekeepers in the last 50 years. That's pretty evidenced by the lack of advancement.
So when I visited the Niels Bohr Institute, I was struck by the openness of mind that characterizes the discussion. And you don't encounter that very often in academia, because lots of people just want the traditional thinking to be dominant. They have echo chambers, and if these people dominate the landscape, then we will not learn anything new.
Yeah. I haven't been to the Niels Bohr Institute. I have been to the Perimeter Institute in Canada. And
I know that very well. And it's also innovative in spirit. Yes.
Very innovative, very open. The entire place is chalkboards. Everyone's throwing ideas.
Yeah, we need more places like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, Avi, thank you so much for joining us here today. I appreciate you being here and sharing what you're discovering. Let's get an update in a few months if we can, if you're still buzzing for the scene. I'd love to have you back on.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Avi. Have a good one. God bless you, and God bless everyone else. We'll see you next time on the Rice Report. Thank you, everybody.